She dialed 911 to crush a defiant farmer over a shed. Little did HOA Karen know. Her target was a deep-cover FBI agent with her arrest warrant in his pocket. Her reign of terror was about to implode in the most ironic way imaginable. Who was really breaking the law on this quiet farm? You won't believe how this power play ends. Stay tuned. The accusation, sharp and serrated as a shard of glass, ripped through the otherwise tranquil Oregon morning. That dilapidated shed is an eyesore and a blatant violation of Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association Covenant. Article 4, Subsection B, Paragraph 7. Jaron Miller, kneeling beside a newly planted row of heirloom tomatoes, didn't flinch. He'd heard that particular tone, a noxious blend of entitlement and aggression before many times, in many different contexts far removed from the fertile soil of his 10-acre sanctuary. He slowly rose, brushing dirt from his worn denim jeans, his movements measured, betraying none of the coiled readiness that was a permanent fixture beneath his calm exterior. Before him, on the other side of his freshly painted 3-rail fence, stood Karen Thorne, or, as she was more commonly, if not affectionately, known throughout the sprawling, manicured estates that bordered his more rustic property, HOA Karen. She was a woman whose posture seemed permanently locked in a state of indignation, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair impervious to the gentle breeze, her tailored pantsuit a stark, sterile contrast to the earthy greens and browns of Jaron's farm. "Morning, Karen, Jaron said, his voice even, a deliberate counterpoint to her stridency. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Beauty is being marred by your flagrant disregard for community standards. Mr. Miller," she snapped. Her eyes, the color of glacial ice, raking over the small, weathered shed he'd recently repurposed to store gardening tools and feed for Snowball. His white Sandon goat currently observing the proceedings with placid curiosity from a nearby patch of clover. That structure is unauthorized. It lacks the approved siding. The roof pitch is incorrect. And frankly, its presence lowers property values for everyone. Jaron leaned against the fence. "It's on my property." Karen, well within the setback lines, and it's been there, in various states, for probably 50 years before this HOA even existed. "I just gave it a new lease on life." He'd checked the original plat maps and the county records. The shed predated Whispering Pines by decades. The HOA covenants, while suffocatingly detailed, had specific grandfathering clauses he knew she conveniently overlooked. This was not Jaron's first run-in with Karen Thorne. Since he'd purchased the old McTavish farm 2 years ago, seeking a quiet life far removed from the concrete jungles and moral ambiguities of his former profession. She had been a persistent, buzzing gnat. His fence was too rustic. His rooster crowed too early, or sometimes too late. His compost pile, meticulously maintained and odor-free, was deemed potentially hazardous. But Jaron Miller wasn't just a retired government paper pusher, as his carefully constructed local legend suggested. The former FBI agent part was true, though the former was a carefully curated descriptor for his current deep cover assignment. The farm wasn't just a retreat, it was an observation post. And Karen Thorne, HOA board treasurer and self-appointed queen of Whispering Pines, wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance. She, or rather, the intricate web of financial transactions she managed with a surprising degree of sophistication for an HOA treasurer, was the reason Jaron was here. A sealed federal warrant for one Catherine Karen Thorne, for charges related to multi-state wire fraud and embezzlement, rested securely in the digital equivalent of his back pocket. Authorized and waiting for the opportune moment, his mission was to observe, gather final irrefutable evidence of ongoing activity, and coordinate the takedown with minimal collateral damage to the larger, ongoing investigation into the network she was a part of. Her escalating HOA aggressions were an unwelcome complication, but also, perversely, an opportunity. Her overreach often led to carelessness. "Antiquity is not an excuse for blight, Mr. Miller," Karen retorted, her voice rising. "The covenants are clear. New structures, or renovations of existing ones, require Architectural Review Committee approval, You submitted no such application. It's a 30-square-foot shed. Karen, for my goat's alfalfa pellets, Jaron said, maintaining his patient facade. Internally, he cataloged her micro-expressions. The slight tremor in her left eyelid tells he'd learned to read like a book. She was agitated today, more so than usual. Perhaps one of her illicit transfers had hit a snag. A goat, she scoffed, as if the very word was offensive. Livestock is another gray area. Miller, this is a residential community, not a petting zoo. Snowball let out a soft ma-ah, as if in gentle protest. Jaron almost smiled. He's a registered therapy animal. Karen, fully documented. Another small, factual grenade he'd prepared for her inevitable encroachment on that front. He had indeed registered Snowball, anticipating this exact complaint. The goat, a rescue, had proven to be a surprisingly calming presence, even for him. Karen's face tightened. She hated being countered with facts that contradicted her assumed authority. Documentation can be questionable. I will be reviewing the bylaws regarding such therapy animals and their permissible proximity to neighboring properties that value hygiene. You do that, Jaron said, turning slightly as if to head back to his tomatoes. This was a delicate dance. He needed her to believe he was just a stubborn, slightly eccentric farmer. Not a threat. Her escalating aggression, however, was pushing the timeline. If she made an official complaint about the shed that involved county inspectors, it could draw unwanted attention to his low-key operation. I am giving you a formal warning, Mr. Miller, Karen announced, her voice regaining its full, imperious volume, clearly intended for any curious neighbors who might be within earshot. He saw Mrs. Henderson, 2 houses down, peek through her blinds. You have 48 hours to either submit a retroactive ARC application, which I can assure you will be denied, or dismantle that offensive structure. Failure to comply will result in daily fines, as stipulated, and further action from the HOA. Duly noted, Jaron said. Without turning back, he could feel her eyes burning into his spine. He knew this wasn't the end of it. Karen Thorne did not handle perceived insubordination well. He spent the rest of the morning tending to his farm. The incident with Karen, a low hum of irritation in the back of his mind. He repaired a loose board on the chicken coop, checked the water levels in the irrigation ditches, and spent an hour meticulously weeding. All the while, his senses were on high alert. He wasn't just listening for the rustle of wind in the pines or the clucking of his hens. He was listening for the sound of Karen's Dan, for the telltale click of her heels on the asphalt of the shared access road. The call came mid-afternoon, not to him directly, of course. He was in a small, sparsely furnished living room, reviewing encrypted financial reports on a secure laptop, data that painted an increasingly damning picture of Karen Thorne's systematic siphoning of HOA reserve funds into offshore accounts, a pattern consistent with the broader criminal enterprise the Bureau was investigating. His personal cell, a burner, vibrated on the table beside him. It was a coded text from his Bureau contact local chatter. 911 call, code 3 response, subject disturbance at your AO, reporting party target. Jaron closed the laptop. So, she'd done it. Unable to intimidate him directly, Karen had escalated. As he'd suspected she might, she'd called the police. On him. A grim smile touched his lips. The irony was almost too perfect. Karen Thorne, a woman with an active federal warrant for financial crimes serious enough to land her in prison for a very long time, was calling 911 to report a code violation on the very man who held the key to her downfall. She was, in essence, dialing her own arrest. He walked to the window, peering through the edge of the curtain. He didn't have to wait long. The distant wail of a siren, growing steadily louder, confirmed the message. 2 county sheriff's cruisers would be pulling up his gravel driveway any minute. His mind raced, not with panic, but with tactical precision. This changed things. His carefully maintained cover was about to be tested. The local deputies would run his name, Jaron Miller, owner of the farm. His prints weren't in the local system under that alias, but his FBI credentials, the real ones, were certainly flagged for any official inquiry. He'd have to manage this carefully, de-escalate with the local LEOs, and protect the integrity of his operation. But one thought resonated above all others. Karen, in her blind arrogance and petty tyranny, had just handed him the perfect, albeit premature, opportunity. She was bringing the law to his doorstep, completely oblivious that its primary interest wouldn't be his shed, or Snowball the goat, its primary interest. Once Jaron made a certain call himself, would be her. The first cruiser crunched onto the gravel. Jaron took a deep breath. Showtime. The two Lynn County Sheriff's Office cruisers, lights now extinguished, pulled to a stop just shy of Jaron's porch. Deputy Rourke, a stout man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too many petty squabbles, stepped out of the first car. His partner, Deputy Olson, younger and leaner, scanned the property with a practiced gaze. And there, standing by the fence line with an air of smug vindication, was Karen Thorne. Arms crossed, tapping an impatient foot, she looked like a vulture waiting for a carcass to be officially declared dead. "Mr. Miller, Jaron Miller," Rourke called out, his voice polite but firm. "That's me, officer," Jaron replied, stepping onto his porch. He kept his hands visible, away from his body. Years of training died hard. "What can I do for you?" "We received a call regarding a disturbance, sir," Rourke stated, his eyes flicking towards Karen, then back to Jaron. "A complaint about an unauthorized structure and potential code violations." Karen, unable to contain herself, interjected from the fence line. "It's right there, officers, that hideous shed. He's been formally warned. It's a clear violation of HOA bylaws, a blight on our community, and he refuses to comply. He's deliberately defiant." Her voice was sharp, carrying an accusatory zeal that seemed disproportionate to a dispute over a garden shed. Rourke held up a hand to silence her, a gesture that clearly irked Karen. "Ma'am, we'll get to that. Mr. Miller, is this your property?" "Yes, it is," Jaron confirmed. "Bought it 2 years ago." "The shed in question, if you mean that small outbuilding," he gestured calmly towards it, "has been part of this farmstead for well over half a century, according to county records. I just put a new roof on it and replaced some rotten boards." Olson, the younger deputy, was now walking the perimeter of the shed. Notepad in hand, Snowball trotted over to him, nudging his leg inquisitively before Olson gently shooed him away. "Mrs. Thorne here alleges it's a new construction, or a substantial enough renovation to require HOA approval, which she says you haven't obtained." Rourke continued, his tone neutral. He was clearly trying to ascertain if this was a civil matter for the HOA or something requiring actual police intervention. Most HOA disputes were the former, a frustrating waste of their time. "The HOA has its own set of rules, officer," Jaron said, choosing his words carefully. "Some of which, in my opinion, overstep their legal bounds, especially concerning pre-existing structures on privately owned land not originally part of their development. But that's a discussion for another time, perhaps with legal counsel present. As for a disturbance, I assure you, there's been no disturbance here. Just a rather one-sided conversation earlier this morning." Karen bristled. "One-sided, he was completely dismissive of legitimate concerns. He even has an unauthorized goat." Rourke sighed, a small, almost imperceptible sound. "Sir, do you have identification on you?" "Certainly," Jaron said. He reached slowly for his back pocket, retrieved his wallet, and handed over his Oregon driver's license. The alias Jaron Miller was well established, complete with a painstakingly crafted, albeit largely fictitious, backstory. Rourke took the license back to his cruiser. Olson continued his slow orbit of the shed, occasionally making notes. Karen watched Rourke, a predatory gleam in her eyes, anticipating Jaron's imminent comeuppance. This was her power flex, wielding the authority of law enforcement for her petty crusades. Jaron remained on the porch, projecting an air of patient cooperation, Inside, his mind was a flurry of calculations. The standard check on a driver's license wouldn't typically flag his FBI status. Not directly. His cover ID was firewalled from routine local checks for exactly this reason. However, if they ran as Prince, which was unlikely for a code violation call, or if the system cross-referenced certain markers, a low-level alert might pop. Something vague like armed and dangerous, NCIC check recommended, or monitor and report federal interest. This was the unpredictable variable. Minutes stretched. Jaren could hear the low murmur of Rourke's voice from the cruiser, likely radioing dispatch. Karen shifted her weight, her smugness beginning to be tinged with impatience. Why was this taking so long? Surely, arresting this defiant hillbilly for his rogue shed was a straightforward matter. Rourke finally emerged from the cruiser. His expression subtly changed. It wasn't hostile, but the easygoing neutrality was gone, replaced by a cautious, almost wary attentiveness. He walked back towards Jaren, handing him back his license. "Everything all right with the license, officer?" Jaren asked, his tone mild. "Comes back clear, Mr. Miller," Rourke said, but his eyes told a different story. They were looking at Jaren with a new level of scrutiny. "Says here you're a retired government consultant." There was a slight hesitation before government consultant. The system had likely returned something non-specific but indicative of a prior federal or sensitive role, enough to make a seasoned cop tread carefully. Jaren gave a slight, non-committal nod. "Something like that. A long time ago. Now, I just prefer tomatoes and quiet." This was the twist Jaren hadn't fully anticipated, but had prepared for time. His cover was designed to be unassuming, but not entirely devoid of a background that could explain certain skills or resources if ever pressed. The retired government consultant was a soft flag, enough to make law enforcement pause and consider that the man before them might be more than just a stubborn farmer. Karen, sensing a shift in the dynamics that she didn't understand and didn't like, strode towards them. "Well, are you going to cite him? Or better yet, arrest him for creating a public nuisance and refusing to cooperate with a legitimate community authority?" Rourke turned to her, his patience visibly thinner. "Ma'am, as far as we can tell, this is a civil dispute between Mr. Miller and the HOA. There's no criminal offense occurring here that we can identify. We don't enforce HOA bylaws. That's for your association to handle through its own channels. And if necessary, civil court." Karen's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "No criminal offense. He's defying a legal order. He's impacting our property values. This structure is an abomination." "That's your opinion, ma'am," Olson interjected, rejoining them. "And with all due respect, your HOA's internal regulations aren't criminal statutes we enforce unless there's a clear breach of public peace or safety. A shed, even one you don't like, doesn't meet that threshold." The younger deputy's straightforward dismissal of her authority seemed to stun Karen more than Rourke's tired professionalism. The impact of her 911 call was not what she'd envisioned. Instead of Jaren being hauled away in handcuffs, the officers were treating him with a newfound subtle deference, and her like the nuisance. But he's clearly breaking the rules," Karen sputtered, her voice escalating into a shrill whine. "You have to do something. I demand you do something. I am a board member. I represent the concerned homeowners of Whispering Pines." Jaren watched the scene unfold, a flicker of grim satisfaction beneath his calm exterior. Karen's own aggression was becoming her undoing in this immediate scenario. She was making herself look unhinged. The deputies were now exchanging glances that clearly communicated, "We've got a live one here." "Ma'am," Rourke said, his voice now carrying a stern edge, "we're not going to arrest Mr. Miller over a dispute about his shed. If you continue to make baseless 911 calls for non-emergency situations like this, you could be cited for misuse of emergency services." That threat hung in the air, thick and unwelcome to Karen, her mouth open, then closed. She looked from the impassive deputies to Jaren, who met her gaze with quiet equanimity. The power dynamic had undeniably shifted. She had summoned the law, and the law had, in essence, sided against her interference. "This is outrageous," she finally managed, her voice trembling with fury. "You haven't heard the last of this, Miller. The HOA will not stand for this." She spun on her heel and marched back towards the road, her expensive heels digging angrily into the gravel shoulder. The deputies watched her go, then turned back to Jaron. "Sorry about that, Miss Miller," Rourke said, a hint of apology in his tone. "HOA disputes can get passionate. I understand. Officer, no harm done." Jaron replied, "Appreciate your time. Just try to keep things civil with the HOA if you can," Olson advised, though he didn't sound particularly optimistic. "They can make life difficult, even if they're not always in the right." "I always aim for civil," Jaron said. "Doesn't always work out that way." As the deputies prepared to leave, Rourke paused. "That government consultant work. Anything we should be aware of out here? Anything unusual?" He was fishing, delicately. The flag on Jaron's ID had clearly piqued his professional curiosity and perhaps a sense of duty. Jaron met his gaze. This was a critical moment. He couldn't reveal his actual mission. "Just looking for peace and quiet." "Officer, trying to leave a complicated past behind me?" "Sometimes, I guess. Complications follow." He offered a small, wry smile. "But nothing that should concern Lynn County Sheriff's Office." "I appreciate you asking, though." Rourke nodded slowly, seemingly accepting the answer, or at least recognizing it was all he was going to get. "All right then, Miller. Have a good day." "You too, officers." Jaron watched them drive away. The immediate threat from Karen's 911 call had been neutralized, even turned to his advantage by exposing her irrationality to the local police. However, the encounter was an escalation. His carefully constructed anonymity had taken a slight hit. The deputies now knew Jaron Miller was more than he appeared, even if they didn't know specifics. And Karen, humiliated and enraged, was unlikely to back down. She would redouble her efforts, possibly in more unpredictable ways. He walked back into his house, his mind already recalibrating. The timeline for Karen Thorne's arrest might need to be advanced. Her desperation could make her sloppy, or more dangerous. He picked up his burner phone. It was time to update his handler. The game had just become a little more complicated and a lot more personal. The irony remained, Karen was still oblivious that her attempt to bring the law down on him had only brought her closer to its grasp. The deputy's departure left a deceptive calm in its wake. Jaron knew Karen Thorne wasn't the type to retreat and reflect. Humiliation, for someone of her narcissistic temperament, was fuel. Her public dressing down by the very authorities she'd summoned would only harden her resolve and likely cloud her judgment. He spent the remainder of the afternoon fortifying his digital security and reviewing the latest intelligence packet on Thorne's network. His senses heightened. The retired government consultant line had bought him breathing room with local law enforcement, but it also painted a subtle target on his back should anyone with more sophisticated resources take an interest. Karen did not disappoint. The following morning, Jaron was mending a section of fence Snowball had been a little too enthusiastic about testing when he spotted her, not in her usual power-walking attire, marching down the shared access road. But lurking, she was half concealed behind a cluster of overgrown rhododendrons on the undeveloped parcel of land that bordered the eastern edge of his farm. A pair of compact binoculars pressed to her eyes. She was attempting surveillance, badly. Jaron suppressed a grim smile. It was amateurish, almost comical. Yet it was also a significant escalation. Her previous attacks were through the HOA's pseudo-legal framework. This was personal, invasive, and potentially treading into criminal territory itself, trespassing and harassment. He continued his work, pretending not to notice her. Let her watch. His property was secure, his activities mundane and agricultural. If she was hoping to catch him burying bodies or brewing moonshine, she was in for a long, boring vigil. What she didn't know was that his entire property, while appearing rustic, was equipped with discreet, motion-activated surveillance of his own, a legacy of his training and current necessities. Her clumsy espionage was already being logged. Later that day, the Whispering Pines Estates HOA online forum, usually a sedate space for discussing landscape contractors and lost pets, exploded. Karen, under her official Karen Thorne Treasurer and Arc Chair signature, had posted a lengthy rambling screed. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression and thinly veiled accusations. Dear concerned residents, it began. It has come to the board's attention that certain individuals residing adjacent to our esteemed community may not fully align with the values and standards we hold dear. While the board respects privacy, there are growing concerns about activities and individuals that could potentially impact our property values, safety, and the general character of Whispering Pines. We are currently investigating certain irregularities and ensuring all local ordinances and, of course, our covenants are being upheld. Some individuals may present themselves as simple, rustic types, but appearances can be deceiving. Rest assured, your board is vigilant and will take all necessary actions to protect our community. She named no names, but the thinly veiled references to a rustic neighbor with irregularities were clearly pointed at Jaron. It was a clumsy attempt to poison the well, to turn public opinion within Whispering Pines against him. Some residents responded with confusion, others with sycophantic support for Karen's vigilance. A few, Jaron noted with interest, pushed back, asking for specifics and questioning the vague, accusatory tone. The investigation she mentioned was, of course, her pathetic spying attempt from the bushes. But the post served another purpose. It signaled her intent to dig. She was now actively trying to find something, anything, to use against him. This was good. Desperate people made mistakes. Jaron decided it was time to give her something to find, or rather, to think she was finding. The next evening, under the cloak of a moonless night, Jaron enacted a small piece of theater. He knew Karen, or someone she might enlist, would likely escalate from clumsy daylight observation to more daring nocturnal snooping. He carried a small, heavy-looking canvas duffel bag from his truck to the old, disused root cellar whose dilapidated wooden doors were set almost flush with the ground near the back of his property, partially obscured by overgrown blackberry bushes. He made sure to walk under the dim security light he'd reluctantly installed after a previous HOA complaint about inadequate nighttime illumination for safety. He fumbled with the rusty padlock, a new addition, opened the cellar doors, glanced around theatrically, and then descended with the bag. He emerged a few minutes later, empty-handed, relocked the padlock, and went back inside his house. The bag contained nothing more than a few old engine parts and some bricks for weight. The root cellar itself was empty, save for spiders and damp earth. But the implication, for someone determined to find wrongdoing, was potent. He didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, his perimeter sensors pinged. A single, stealthy figure was making their way across the dew-laden grass towards the root cellar. Jaron watched on his monitors, a thermal imaging overlay cutting through the darkness. It was Karen, dressed in dark clothing, a cheap flashlight held low. She moved with a clumsy furtiveness that was more anxious than adept. She reached the root cellar, her breath misting in the cool night air. She produced a set of bolt cutters, surprisingly robust ones, and after a brief struggle, snapped the padlock. Her small victory was palpable even on the grainy thermal feed. She pulled open the heavy wooden doors and, after a moment's hesitation, slipped inside. Jaron waited. He let her have a full 5 minutes in the damp, empty hole, her flashlight beam dancing around, revealing nothing but cobwebs and dirt. He could almost feel her frustration, her confusion. This was supposed to be where he hid his nefarious secrets. As she re-emerged, looking defeated and perhaps a little foolish, Jaron made his move. He didn't turn on floodlights or shout. He simply opened his back door, stepped onto the porch, and said, quite calmly into the night, "Lost. Karen." The effect was instantaneous. Karen yelped, a strangled, terrified sound, spinning around and dropping her flashlight. It rolled away, its beam pointing erratically at the sky. She froze, silhouetted against the slightly less dark horizon, like a startled deer. "Mr. Miller," she gasped, her voice trembling. I, I was just, I thought I heard a noise, an animal, perhaps trapped." Her excuse was pathetic, even by her standards. "An animal with bolt cutters?" Jaren asked, his voice laced with a dangerous quiet. He slowly walked towards her, not menacingly, but with an undeniable air of command. Snowball, awakened by the commotion, trotted out from the small barn, letting out a curious, "Ma!" No, I found these here," she stammered, gesturing vaguely at the ground, the bolt cutters lying near the broken padlock. "You're trespassing on my property." "Karen," Jaren stated, his voice hardening, "in the middle of the night, you've broken my lock and entered a private structure. That's breaking and entering. What exactly were you hoping to find in my root cellar?" Karen was cornered, literally and figuratively. Her usual bluster evaporated, replaced by a raw, poorly concealed panic. "This is still about that shed, isn't it? You're trying to intimidate me. I have rights. The HOA has rights to ensure no one is conducting illegal activities." "My root cellar is hardly a community concern," Jaren said, stopping a few feet from her. "Unless you have some evidence I'm storing something illegal there. Did you find anything? Karen, anything at all?" Her silence was his answer. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, but she was caught. "You know, Karen," Jaren continued, his tone shifting, becoming almost conversational, though the underlying steel remained. "I've been very patient with the HOA, with you. I just want to farm my land in peace, but this is a new level. This is a criminal act." A flicker of her old arrogance returned, fueled by desperation. "You can't prove anything. It's my word against yours. Who are they going to believe, a respected HOA board member? Or you, Jaren almost smiled. "That's an interesting question. Karen, who will they believe?" He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Perhaps we should invite the deputies back out, Rourken and Olson. They seemed to have a good handle on things the other day. I'm sure they'd be very interested in your nocturnal activities and your skill with bolt cutters, trespassing, property damage, breaking and entering. Those are actual crimes, unlike having a shed they don't like." The mention of the deputies and the very real crimes he listed visibly shook her. The color drained from her face. She remembered how they had treated her, how they had looked at Jaren with that unexpected caution. "There's no need for that," she said quickly, her voice suddenly small. "It was a misunderstanding. I was disoriented. I saw the light from your house. I thought perhaps there was a prowler." "A prowler you decided to sneak up on and then break into my cellar to confront?" Jaren raised an eyebrow. "Your story keeps changing. Karen, it's not very convincing." This was the hidden truth he'd maneuvered her into, revealing her utter desperation, her willingness to commit actual crimes to pursue her vendetta, and her complete lack of viable excuses when caught. The power had shifted entirely. She was no longer the accuser. She was the culprit, caught red-handed. "Look," she pleaded, a wheedling tone entering her voice that Jaren had never heard from her before. It was the sound of someone who knew they were beaten. "Maybe I overreacted about the shed. Let's just forget this happened. No harm, no foul. I won't say anything if you don't." Jaren considered her. This was the moment. Her attempt to find leverage had backfired spectacularly, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. He had her on multiple, provable offenses, but more importantly, her panicked, irrational behavior was exactly the kind of state that made criminals careless in other, more significant areas of their lives. "I'll think about it, Karen," Jaren said slowly. "But I suggest you get off my property. Now. And I wouldn't recommend any more late-night inspections. My patience has its limits." Karen didn't need telling twice. She practically scrambled back towards the property line, leaving the bolt cutters and her dignity behind. Jaren watched her go, He picked up the bolt cutters and the broken padlock. He hadn't called the deputies. Not yet. Her little escapade had given him something far more valuable than a local arrest for trespassing. It had given him the psychological edge, and potentially, the final piece of leverage he needed for the much larger game at play. Her fear, her desperation, would make her sloppy. He went inside and made a call to his handler. Subject is becoming increasingly erratic. Attempted unauthorized entry on my property tonight. I think she's feeling the pressure. It might be time to tighten the net. She's rattled. She might make a mistake with the accounts. Try to move funds, cover her tracks. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Understood. We've been seeing some unusual flagged activity on our primary financial conduits since yesterday afternoon. Shortly after her HOA forum outburst, small transfers, unusual destinations. It seems your theatrics and her public humiliation are having the desired effect. Stay vigilant. We might be moving sooner than anticipated. Jaron hung up. Karen Thorne, in her obsessive quest to punish him for a garden shed, was accelerating her own downfall. The trap he had baited with an empty root cellar was working better than he could have hoped. The resistance had crumbled into a panicked retreat, and the revelation was that Karen Thorne was not a cunning adversary, but a desperate woman on the verge of total collapse. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in watching a cornered animal unravel. Karen Thorne's digital footprint became frantic. Small, unusual sums of money darted between accounts like scared fish, some attempting to burrow into poorly encrypted offshore havens, others being hastily withdrawn as cash. Her online communications, monitored by Jaron's colleagues through legal intercepts tied to the broader investigation, were a flurry of panicked, coded messages to associates who were suddenly becoming very hard to reach. The HOA forum was silent. Her usual barrage of directives and passive-aggressive pronouncements had ceased. Whispering Pines was, for once, truly quiet. Jaron, meanwhile, maintained his farmer persona, though his vigilance was at its peak. He mucked out Snowball's pen, harvested a basket of late-season peppers, and even exchanged a brief, civil nod with Mr. Henderson from down the street, who seemed to regard him with a new, almost respectful curiosity. The gossip mill, Jaron suspected, was working overtime, likely fueled by Karen's uncharacteristic silence in the deputy's previous visit. The call he was waiting for came on the third morning, just as dawn was painting the Oregon sky in hues of soft pink and gray. It wasn't his burner phone this time, but a direct, secure line to his FBI special agent in charge. Miller, the SAC's voice was crisp. It's time. Thorne just booked a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands, departing Portland International this afternoon. Flight 714, she's running. The U.S. Attorney's Office has greenlit the arrest. Local backup is en route to your location for the formal apprehension. We want her before she even thinks about packing a suitcase. Your primary objective was observation and evidence, but this is your collar if you want it. You have the warrant. A grim satisfaction settled over Jaron. After 2 years of patient, meticulous work, of enduring Karen Thorne's petty tyrannies while building an irrefutable case against her far more serious crimes, it was ending. And it was ending, poetically, right where she had tried to assert her misguided dominance. Copy that, SAC. I'll take her down here. Less fuss, more contained. Jaron replied. His farm was isolated enough. No need for a scene at the airport. Good. Team lead for the backup is Agent Ramirez. She'll coordinate with you. They're 10 minutes out. We'll have a unit pick her up from local PD once you've processed her. Jaron disconnected. 10 minutes. He walked to the old oak gun cabinet, a relic from the previous owner, now repurposed, and unlocked it. Inside, nestled beside a rarely used hunting rifle, was his service weapon, a Sig Sauer P226 and his FBI credentials and badge. He hadn't worn them in 2 years. He clipped the badge to his belt, beneath his flannel shirt, and holstered the Sig at the small of his back. The weight was familiar, a ghost of his past life reasserting itself. He heard the crunch of tires on the access road. Not the heavy tread of FBI vehicles, they would be more discreet, but a lighter, more frantic sound. He glanced out the window. It was Karen's Lexus sedan, driving far too fast, kicking up a plume of dust. She wasn't heading towards the main road, towards the airport. She was heading towards his farm. Jaron frowned. This was unexpected. Why would she come here? He stepped onto his porch just as Karen skidded to a halt near his fence line, her car door flying open. She practically fell out, her hair disheveled, her face pale and etched with terror. She wasn't the imperious HOA Karen anymore. She was a fugitive. Miller, you have to help me, she cried, her voice ragged. She stumbled towards his gate, fumbling with the latch. They're coming for me. I know they are. I don't know who else to turn to. Jaron stared at her, an eyebrow raised. The sheer audacity, the monumental delusion of this woman was breathtaking. After everything, the harassment, the trespassing, the attempts to ruin his quiet life, the underlying massive fraud, she was now seeking refuge with him. Help you, Karen, Jaron asked, his voice flat, devoid of any sympathy he didn't feel. Why on earth would I help you? Because you're not like them, she blurted out, her eyes wild. Those HOA people, my business associates, they're all turning on me. I heard things. They know about the transfers. Someone must have tipped them off. You live out here. You're off the grid. You understand trying to stay hidden. I can pay you. I have money. Still, some of it. So, her network was collapsing, and in her paranoia, she imagined Jaron, the stubborn recluse who defied her HOA, as some kind of kindred spirit in an anti-establishment crusade. Or perhaps, she simply saw him as her last, most desperate option. Jaron saw the flicker of movement at the edge of his property. Agent Ramirez and her team, two dark sedans gliding silently into prearranged concealed positions. They were waiting for his signal. It's a little late for that, Karen, Jaron said, his voice calm, but with an edge that finally seemed to penetrate her panic-induced delirium. He took a step forward. You see, you've made a few very serious miscalculations. He reached under his flannel shirt. Karen watched, her breath hitching, perhaps expecting him to pull out a wad of cash to bargain with, or a weapon to defend her. Instead, he revealed the gleaming silver FBI badge. Jaron Miller, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He stated, his voice ringing with an authority she had never heard, an authority that dwarfed her petty HOA power into insignificance. Karen Thorne, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Karen Thorne froze. Her mouth fell open. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, flicked from the badge to Jaron's face, then back to the badge. The color drained completely from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a wax figure. The confident HOA tyrant, the clumsy spiewe, the desperate fugitive, all the Karen she had been, shattered in that instant, leaving only a terrified, defeated criminal. FBI, she whispered, the word barely audible. You butt, the shed, the goat. Her mind struggled to reconcile the image of the unassuming farmer with the reality of the federal agent standing before her. The sheer colossal irony of her entire campaign against him finally crashed down upon her. She had spent months harassing, threatening, and ultimately calling the police on a man who had a federal warrant for her arrest in his pocket all along. The shed is fine, Karen, Jaron said, a hint of dry amusement in his tone. Snowball is an excellent goat, and you, unfortunately, are an embezzler. Engineer Ramirez and two other agents, now clearly visible, approached calmly but purposefully from two directions, their movements efficient and professional. One of them held out a pair of handcuffs. Karen didn't resist. She seemed to deflate, all the fight gone out of her, as Ramirez expertly cuffed her hands behind her back. Karen looked at Jaron one last time, her expression a mixture of utter bewilderment and dawning, horrified comprehension. My 911 call, she mumbled, more to herself than to anyone. The deputies, they looked at you, They knew. They knew something wasn't quite right. Yes, Jaren confirmed. You were so busy trying to enforce your little rules. Karen, you never stopped to consider who you were actually dealing with. You invited the law to your doorstep, and it finally arrived. Just not for me. As Agent Ramirez read Karen her Miranda rights, the disgraced HOA queen seemed to shrink further. The once mighty voice that had terrorized Whispering Pines with pronouncements about lawn maintenance and approved paint colors was now silent. Her reign was over, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of handcuffs on a tranquil farm morning. The two deputies, Rourke and Olson, arrived a few minutes later. As per the coordination, they looked from the cuffed Karen Thorne, now sitting forlornly in the back of one of the FBI sedans, to Jaren Miller, who was now calmly briefing Agent Ramirez. Rourke caught Jaren's eye and gave a slow, knowing nod. The retired government consultant now made a whole lot more sense. The pieces clicked into place. Jaren watched them drive Karen away. The threat to his mission, to his quiet life, was gone. The larger criminal network she was part of would now face intensified scrutiny. Thanks to the evidence in her own panicked actions, Snowball trotted over and nudged Jaren's hand, looking for a scratch behind the ears. Jaren obliged, gazing out over his peaceful farm. The sun was higher now, burning off the last of the morning mist. It was, indeed, a beautiful day. The kind of day where justice, in its own peculiar and often ironic way, was served. His work here was done. Perhaps now, Jaren Miller could finally, truly, just be a farmer.